Right now, somewhere on this planet, a rifle is being loaded, a pistol is being holstered, a cannon is being aimed. Firearms outnumber cars on Earth. And nearly every one of them, every hunting rifle, every handgun, every artillery piece, exists because a handful of monks in 9th century China were trying to cheat death itself. They weren't soldiers. They weren't planning a war. They were Taoist alchemists, working in mountain workshops under imperial funding, chasing the elixir of immortality, a mixture they believed could stop the human body from aging entirely. Chinese emperors funded this research personally, and some drank whatever their alchemists produced. Several are now believed to have died slowly from mercury and arsenic poisoning, killed by the very potions meant to keep them alive forever. But one specific mixture did something none of those emperors expected. It didn't heal anyone. It didn't extend anyone's life. It exploded. The recipe combined 3 ordinary substances: sulfur, a mineral already used to treat skin conditions; charcoal, essentially the same material you'd use to grill dinner; and saltpeter, a crystalline crust that forms naturally in caves, cellars, and old manure piles. The oldest surviving account of this discovery comes from a Taoist text called the Zhenyuan Miao Dao Yao Lue, compiled around 850 AD, and translated centuries later by the Cambridge historian Joseph Needham. It isn't a recipe. It's a warning. Describing alchemists who tried this combination and ended up with burned hands, singed faces, and in at least one case, an entire workshop reduced to ash. Here's the part worth sitting with for a second. Saltpeter carries its own oxygen, locked inside its crystal structure. A normal fire pulls oxygen from the surrounding air, which takes time. That's why a campfire burns slowly for hours. This mixture didn't wait. It fed itself all at once, releasing a massive burst of hot gas. Instantly. Out in the open, that's a flash and a bang. Trap that gas inside something solid, and the pressure has to escape somewhere. Violently. That single principle, an oxygen-hungry fire with nowhere to go, is the foundation of every gun ever built. The alchemists named their discovery Huayao, fire medicine, because in their minds, this was still medical research. It just needed some adjusting. For roughly 2 centuries, that's mostly what it remained. An ingredient in fireworks, festival displays, and folk remedies, nowhere near a battlefield. Then, sometime in the 900s, Chinese military engineers packed the mixture into bamboo tubes and lashed them to the ends of spears, creating a crude but genuinely terrifying weapon called the fire lance. Defenders used them in 1132 during the siege of the city of Daan, spraying flame directly into the faces of attackers climbing the walls. What happened next is arguably the more important accident. Soldiers started stuffing broken pottery, scrap metal, and loose stones into the tubes alongside the powder, hoping to make the burst nastier. But examining the wounds afterwards, it became obvious. The flame itself barely mattered anymore. The debris flying out of the tube was doing the real damage, and it was traveling much farther than any flame could reach. Nobody sat down and deliberately designed a bullet. It emerged sideways, out of soldiers trying to make a flamethrower worse. There was just one problem. Bamboo can only survive so much pressure before it splits, sometimes taking the user's hands off with it. So Chinese craftsmen switched to casting the tube in bronze instead. And the moment that happened, the fire lance stopped being a fire lance. It had become a gun. Archaeologists in Heilongjiang province later uncovered one of these bronze hand cannons, dated to no later than 1288, matched to a documented battle from that same year. Roughly a forearm's length of solid metal with a single hole for the fuse. The technology didn't stay in China. The Mongol Empire, at that point stretching from the Pacific coast almost to Eastern Europe, carried gunpowder along every trade route and military campaign it touched. Within decades, formulas were appearing in the Middle East. and in Europe, where an English friar named Roger Bacon described the mixture in 1267 in a massive text called the Opus Majus, the earliest confirmed European reference to gunpowder. Bacon was so wary of the knowledge spreading carelessly that he encoded the formula as a scrambled anagram, rather than writing it out plainly. 2 centuries after a monk's failed immortality potion burned down a workshop, gunpowder was ending an empire. In 1453, a Hungarian iron founder named Orban, after being turned away by the Byzantines for asking too high a price, built the Ottoman Sultan a bronze cannon nearly 30 feet long, hauled to Constantinople by 60 oxen. The city's walls had turned back every siege for over 1,000 years. Orban's cannon needed weeks. Cannons could level a wall, but you can't carry one into a duel. So gunsmiths shrank the design down for a single soldier and immediately hit a new problem. Firing a hand cannon meant pressing a burning cord into a small hole with one hand while steadying the weapon with the other, meaning at the exact moment of firing, you were staring at the hole instead of the target. The fix, arriving in the late 1400s, was the matchlock, a mechanical arm that pressed the cord in for you at the pull of a lever, finally freeing both hands and both eyes for aiming. The matchlock introduced its own weakness immediately. An open flame, which rain extinguished, which glowed visibly at night, and which sat uncomfortably close to a bag of gunpowder at all times. Around 1500, gunsmiths answered with the wheellock, a spring-loaded steel wheel that spun against a chunk of pyrite to throw sparks. No flame required. It worked beautifully, and it cost a fortune, restricting it mostly to wealthy cavalry who could afford one, the version everyone else could afford. Arrived around 1610, credited to a French court gunsmith named Marin le Bourgeois, working under King Louis XIII. His flintlock clamped a piece of flint into a spring-loaded arm that struck a steel plate on the trigger pull, showering sparks directly into the powder. It was cheap, it was dependable, and it remained the standard firearm across the world for the next 200 years, carried by Napoleon's armies and by both sides of the American Revolution. But it still had one enormous flaw that shaped the way entire wars were fought. Reloading a flintlock took a trained soldier roughly 20 seconds, and standing there defenseless for 20 seconds while an enemy charged was a death sentence for one man alone. That's the actual reason old battles look the way they do in paintings. Long lines of men standing upright in the open, firing in disciplined rows. It wasn't recklessness. While one row reloaded, the next stood ready. The formation itself was built entirely around that 20-second gap. The man who finally closed that gap wasn't a general, wasn't a gunsmith by trade. He was a Church of Scotland minister named Alexander Forsyth, and his real motivation was ducks. Forsyth's flintlock kept betraying him on hunting trips because the instant he pulled the trigger, a visible flash lit the priming pan a split second before the shot actually fired. Just long enough for a duck to see it coming and dive. In 1807, Forsyth patented a mechanism using a detonating chemical that exploded on impact instead of a spark. No flash, no delay, no dependence on dry weather. Other gunsmiths spent the following years refining his principle into the copper percussion cap, and from there into the self-contained cartridge, sealing primer, powder, and bullet into a single case. The direct ancestor of every round fired from any modern firearm. So here's the full arc. A search for eternal life produced an explosion nobody wanted. That explosion became a flame weapon, which accidentally became a projectile weapon, which became a cannon, which became a handheld gun. Solved one flaw at a time across 4 centuries by a French gunsmith, a spinning wheel, and a minister more concerned about scaring off ducks than making history. Nobody involved set out to build the thing you'll hear on a movie screen tonight. They were trying at every single stage to solve a much smaller, much more human problem. And somewhere along that 1100-year chain of accidents, they built one of the most consequential machines humanity has ever made.